This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 156.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Erman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here with my co-host, Mr. Matt, the Quizmaster Rogers. Matt, I love that quizzes shirt you're sporting.
See,
thanks to our good friend Kyle Nemus.
Yeah, the only brand that we represent anymore.
That's right. How you doing, my friend?
I am chaotic. If we're going to be honest, we are recording this on the Tuesday of the week of Christmas. And I don't know about you, Ken. I don't know who is involved in making our schedule this year. I know Christmas is on a Monday, but I have school until Friday, and it is just already setting up to be quite a special week. We'll put it that way.
Oh yeah, yeah. We're until Friday too. You either, especially if you're in elementary, I feel like you either need to embrace it or call out sick.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
like there's no way to avoid it. I embraced it. We would typically do at least 2 or 3 days of like cross grade level activities where we would do STEM challenges. I would always do a Pollyanna gift exchange on the last day before break with my class because it would take up like 2 hours because they'd be stealing presents from each other. Yeah. It was a simple entry. It was a maximum of $5. You were not allowed to spend more than $5. So you could spend no money if you wanted to participate.
That's a fantastic idea. So I've been getting into it as outfit-wise, and we have some experiences. Actually, our friend Rhino over at Flux offered an experience. I'll fill you in next week after the entries are in, so you can't steal it from me. But so we've been working on that very diligently. Today I was the Grinch, and I walked around the entire school and just stole things and caused havoc in classrooms. It was a very enjoyable day. So I've been leaning into it, but when you have to come back and get order of your own kids, it's been an experience. We'll put it that
Absolutely.
way.
So we had an awesome guest on tonight. Shared your first name. We've had fellow Matts on a couple of times.
Have we had a Ken? I guess we've had.
I don't think so.
I don't know. We've had 156 episodes. We've had to have had a Ken.
I'll have to confirm, but I don't think we have. All so right. It was one of those rare opportunities where we have the chance to talk to someone who has been up and down the entire educational system and still has such a student teacher centered perspective. What were your thoughts from the conversation?
Using what you're using as the jumping off point, I am thrilled to recognize that someone with such influence on education, because of the role that he has right now, continues to represent the same values that I would imagine he had as a district level administrator, a classroom teacher, and the same values as we as educators have. And he is in the position to influence policy, which is just fantastic.
Yeah, it was one of those episodes where I think, I think we pride ourselves on this podcast where we really extract a lot of instructional strategies teachers can use and things that they can apply directly to their classroom the following day. And I think this conversation falls into the category of refreshing perspective, of a good feeling of where education is, where it can go, how different people in different positions are working towards what students need and what students want. not, and that's just taking into account what he's doing now. The whole conversation of how to serve special ed students, I think, is something that teachers will be able to apply directly to their classroom that we talked about in the first half of the conversation. So we really had a really wide ranging conversation that I think is beneficial for our listeners. So if it's okay with you, I have confirmed we have not had a Ken on the show. We've had a Kennedy as the last name, but no Ken. So we'll have to make that a 2024 goal. So if it's okay with you, Matt, we'll bring our guests into the conversation right after we hear from our Teach Better Network.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcast. Now let's get back to the episode.
Hi, Matt. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing tonight?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Ken.
Absolutely. I'm really excited for this conversation. So kick things off for us. Introduce yourself to our audience. Let us know where you're coming from and give us a snapshot of what your career has looked like in and related to education.
Sure. So I'm Matt Nava. I'm living in California, specifically Central California in Fresno. I'm currently the executive director of the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. My career journey in getting here was I was sharing with Matt before the podcast that, it started I started as a fifth grade teacher and then had an opportunity to be a special day class teacher for students with disabilities, 4, 5, 6, and got a specialty, found my love of that and specialty in autism. And from there, it took off, and I had an opportunity to serve students with disabilities along my career path. And prior to the executive directorship, I was with WestEd, Director of Sister Transformation, where I worked with 29 states across the country, helping them improve outcomes for their low-performing school systems. And prior to that, I was in Sanger Unified for 19 years, which I spent a portion of that as superintendent of Sanger Unified. And I don't know if many people on your podcast, they probably don't know the story of Sanger Unified. Sanger Unified is the nation's Christmas tree city. It's the gateway to the giant sequoias. It's a small town outside of in Central California, and Calvin Coolidge had anointed it the nation's Christmas tree city. It's also known as a transformational district story because back in 1999, 2000, when you entered that town, it said, "Welcome to Sanger Home, the nation's Christmas tree city." And they have a giant emblem that honors that. It also had a billboard that said, "Welcome to Sanger Home of 400 unhappy teachers." And both those stood right next to each other as the welcome mat to anyone who drove through town on their way to the Sequoia National Park. So it's quite a national story. And I won't get into the many other facets of education that I had an opportunity to play in, but I definitely spent time in elementary, junior high, and high school, and taught some chemistry and world history, and most of my passion was serving students with disabilities.
Did you, when you got into teaching, did you anticipate that being your path of enjoying working with and serving students with special needs, or did it come, from your first teaching experience? When did that passion really start and thrive?
Sure. Yeah, I was sharing that. So I was back then, and I go way back to 91, 92 is when I first started teaching. And back there, at that time, you could teach with 124 units. So as long as you had a BA, you could teach. And so it wasn't all the red tape and minutia that young professionals have to go through these days. And so I had an opportunity to coach and taught fifth grade. And I had a principal who said to me at 21 and a half, don't know what I don't know. He said, "Hey, I have a great gig for you for next year." And I said, "Really?" And he says, "It only has 6 students in it." And I said, "Sign me up." and I had no idea that I was signing up for a special day class. So come summer, we go through it, and I said, "Hey, I'm ready to take on this class that you said had fewer than 6 kids in it." And he said, "Yeah, by the way, it's a special education classroom with students with disabilities." I said, "No, I had no idea." He says, "Well, to teach that class, I need you to, think about getting a master's degree." And up until that point, I had no inclination around, how to serve students with disabilities. I had no drive that was something I was going to do. I thought I'd teach fifth grade forever, and found myself quickly falling in love with that, Ken, and falling in love with the parents who were challenged by a myriad of things that come with trying to educate a child that needs really rich resources and supports. And I fell in love with, how do you make the system work for students with disabilities? How do you get adults galvanized around how you provide the right resources? And more importantly, how do you overcome mindset around the limitations of what kids can do for students with disabilities? So how do you sit in an IEP and have a conversation about college graduation for this young? And I found myself in these meetings where people weren't talking about that, and I felt a calling that I needed to be in that space. And God opened up doors from there, and everywhere I served I had an opportunity that most people didn't want to serve, the complexity around students with disabilities, but they would say, "Hey, Matt, were you willing to take over the workability program? Are you willing to take over the transition program, 18 to 22? Can you handle this program and that program?" And I was always, yes, happy to do that. And so it just opened up opportunities to serve. And ultimately, the governor appointed me in several boards at the state level. I got to serve. My last stint was the State Board of Education as a representative for that conversation for California, and I would wear that special education hat quite often in those conversations. So it led to a lot of open doors, for sure.
Can you clarify? I think one of the things that I guess I'll start by saying sometimes we feel naive as educators to what a classroom like that actually looks like, and the needs that you're serving, because regular ed, when you are in pre-service teaching, you are learning curriculum and behavior management tactics and other things that you're considering. And realistically, whatever your grade and whatever your school adopts as a curriculum, you adjust to that. And training for special ed, the fine training you got at 21 years old, I'm sure much prepared you for this. But the world of special ed has what we often see in a traditional elementary school, which is itinerant push-in instruction that goes out and works on isolated skills, or more supplemental, where they have significant gaps in their learning. But there are obviously more inclusion of autistic classrooms with emotional disturbances, and certain schools are built for multiple disabilities and higher needs. So can you just give some perspective of what a classroom like yours may have included, and how you found it matches what traditional teachers would expect as a classroom, if that makes sense?
Sure. So it's not much different than it is now, unfortunately. So a special day class at that particular time and currently has a grade span in it. And I had 4, 5, 6. And so you would have fewer students, obviously, but you needed to meet each of those students where they were academically, which not all of them were at the same level, right? They had multiple needs for literacy, multiple needs for math, multiple needs for writing, and all of those defined by their goals and objectives in their IEP. And so for me, at that particular time, I had 6 students, which grew to 10 eventually. And I had a pair 8.5, and we would try to have a normal traditional schedule, where we found opportunities to push our students into the general education classroom to have successful opportunities with their typical developing peers. We would do that. And oftentimes what I found, Matt, was I was welcomed when there was art. My students were welcomed when there was PE. I wasn't always welcomed when it was an academic push-in. When I wanted my students to be there for math, or be there for English language arts, or be there for, and oftentimes if they were going to be placed, it came with, well, who's going to be with them? Who's going to be their one-on-one and help them through this? And we have walked ourselves into a situation where the general education classroom teacher is also incredibly overwhelmed at times in trying to meet kids where they are in all subjects, particularly at elementary school. And it's just a natural inclination to say, whose responsibility is this child? Because I have the responsibility for these 32. And you're wanting to push in this 1 or 2. So who's going to be responsible for that? And I think, for me, where we align special educators and general educators is the issues around how we tackle the myriad of needs that students have, and where we tend to differ is that a special education teacher or practitioner believes that the best place for a student to be served in most cases is with the general education classroom as the starting point. And that the special education room is the technical assistance for targeted supports that needs to occur, whether it's behavioral modification or behavioral supports or whatever that may be. And what we've done in California, and I don't know if it's like this in Pennsylvania or elsewhere, is the starting point is the wrong place. We start in the special education classroom and then we work ourselves out. That's so hard to do. That's so much more difficult, and where we're aligned in general ed and special education, we tend to get disconnected. It's particularly when it comes to older students that students with emotional supports that are needed. Students in the secondary schools where there may not be on a diploma track per se in some places. They may have workability goals in their IEPs, and so it for me, it's very similar in terms of the challenges, very similar alignment in terms of how we think about the approaches and the needs of students, particularly different when we think about how to do that and where they should start in terms of where do you start the conversation. And for me, we need to start the conversation in the general education classroom, but the general education teacher will say, I can do that. I just need enough supports and resources to make sure that the child's successful and that I'm successful. And sometimes we fall short of those.
What would you say, and this is going to be hard to answer because there's so many factors that could play into it, and you can pick a grade level if it will help add context to the conversation. What do you think is some of the best strategies or best approaches or even mindset that a regular education teacher can have to best support a student to be as included as possible in their classroom and, one, feel successful, and two, reach realistic levels of success?
Mm-hmm. So I think there's a couple of different ways. Ken, that's a great question. But I think sometimes we get so focused on the academic supports that we forget that there's a whole nother game that is so much more important to a parent of a child with a disability or even the child with a disability. And I always try to have that conversation with, what are the things that we can do to make the number one, the child feel welcome and have the emotional support there in place? Are there check-in and check-out systems that we can create in your room that will allow that child to feel like they belong there? What is the normalcy of that class? And I think the general education teacher mindset is, I want the child to be successful academically. The special education teacher's mindset is, yes, we do, but that may not be the primary goal of the opportunity to be included in your class. So prioritizing the goals around, what do you want the student to be able to do? That's the first question I think that a teacher needs to be able to ask. And if they can ask that question, it's not what do we want the child to learn, it's what do you want the child to be able to do. And in special education, that has various opportunities, because I may want the child to be able to come into the classroom, participate in a discussion. And the goal of writing a 5-paragraph essay may not be what I want them to be able to do. Mm-hmm. But I think sometimes we think about that as a special education teacher. I did, in my short stint, what do we want the child to learn? And as a result of that learning, they have to be able to demonstrate something. But with my special education child, the strategy is a little bit different. What do I want them to be able to do to be a functioning with their typical developing peers? That's first and foremost. And that has a myriad of activities and
interrupt real
behaviors.
quick.
Yeah.
I love that question. And it's not even asking that question, but who you're asking that question to. Are you asking the student? Are you asking the parents? Are you asking the case manager? And depending on the age of the child is going to depend on who you're asking. But
yes,
I think it's such an important question, and to ask all of the key stakeholders involved. Sorry.
Yes. No, I appreciate that, Ken. It's everybody, because what mom and dads may say is different than what the general education, special education teacher may say. If we can just get on the same page on that, what do you want the child to be able to do? And then we have some measures about how we're going to demonstrate that they're able to do that. You'll often find that the academic goals, yeah, those are important and they'll come. But for most special education teachers and general education teachers, at least special education in my mind, it's how do we make them successful with their typical developing peers so that they can then be part of the learning.
Well, I think that the benefits that we see, and I'll make the most recent, my school district did not have a large ESL population that has changed, where there are people and students from other cultures moving to our area. Predominantly it's Spanish, but it's not 100% that. Mm-hmm. But in some ways, welcoming a student that I can't say no to, I can't, at least an English language learner is going to be in my homeroom and going to be with me a lot of time and go see supports based off their exposure to the English language for short periods of a day. Whereas in special ed, it might be a little bit larger chunks. That idea of exposure is fantastic, but sometimes that's all we're striving for as a regular ed teacher. Like, hey, I can't have any expectations. And that is such a defeating perspective to have, and such a challenging perspective. But you almost want to say, I'm not responsible for this kid. No, not necessarily. I have to have realistic expectations, and what can I do to maximize that? And maybe that's just exposure, and maybe that's just access to grade level vocabulary, and maybe that is whatever those cases may be. But the other side that we often don't think about, it's a hypothetical, or maybe not hypothetical. It's a assumption is, what are the benefits for the whole class of including a population that's different into our classroom? And the incredible, obviously, the older the kids, you have certain things that could go in certain directions, but the growth in empathy in kids, or to see kids take care of other kids and support other kids, develop soft skills, that is so much more important, that benefits both the kid that's getting the support and the one that's providing it. In the same sense, like I had a student move from Costa Rica in the middle of the school year. I had 3 girls that partnered with her and learned so much of that language because they wanted to help that student. You can't tell me, did their reading scores improve drastically that year? They improved, but you can't tell me that they did not grow as a human substantially from that opportunity, while also supporting me, support this girl, who could have showed up petrified to the scenario. And I think that's where there is a lot of truth to the theory of inclusion and push in and these opportunities, as long as you're allowing for collaborative opportunity, as long as you're allowing some ownership by the students, if you're allowing those times for empathy to shine through, there is so much benefit that is hard to put a value on, or a price tag on, to show what they really get out of it.
Absolutely, Matt. That's a great point.
So go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I guess the direction that I sometimes struggle with, and we were talking before the show, as a former special ed teacher, now regular ed teacher, and you kind of, short stint as regular ed teacher shifting into the world of special ed. One of the difficulties that I often find is that term advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
And what advocacy looks like for a population that is so unique and so inconsistent kid to kid. So as I'm just kind of curious, as you are starting as an advocate with families of the kids that you're serving, and then moving up in a role like that where you're continuing to advocate for all kids, statewide at a certain point, if not larger, what does that advocacy look like that still feels intentional and not just listen to me, kids need challenge, and here are broad things that I would like to do to change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question, Matt. So I'll attack it from the question from the state perspective and give you a sense as to how we're approaching it here in terms of I wouldn't say it's from our lens, it's advocacy as much as it is equitable outcomes for all students in the state of California. And so we have our mission statement, which is, to provide all students a quality, equitable education. And we have our vision, which is to transform public education so every student is prepare to thrive and their best selves in the world. And so there's a way in which we can do that as a state agency. I'll tell you what we've done that has created challenges for equity, and I'll tell you what we're trying to do from a broader perspective to bridge that gap. I think so when I served as director of system transformation with Westwood, we worked with 29 states. Those 29 states were all struggling to improve outcomes for students. They all wanted to attack the conversation from either advocacy for equitable outcomes, essentially is what it was. But the dilemma is that the state policies that we have created to hold the system accountable for improved outcomes, I would argue has been counterproductive to the opportunities that you just talked about, Matt, which is the inclusive opportunities for students with disabilities. Because back in the early 90s, when I was teaching, I had more of an appetite from teachers to venture into the unknown and to give kids an opportunity and a chance to be successful in their classes. Even though inclusion wasn't a big buzzword at that time, there was more of a willingness to do that. As the testing and the accountability structures for states has ramped up, and the advocacy around improving outcomes for all students all the time as fast as you can, teachers have more standards to teach than they have days in the year. And so when they get into this opportunity to teach their students, they're moving at a rapid pace on their scope and sequence. They don't have room to take a lot of breath. The reteach is done during the classroom or during a response to intervention time. And then you're asking them now to, on top of that, build some equitable outcomes for students with disabilities. They would argue they can't even get equitable outcomes in the time frame that is being asked of them, because when you take 180 days of the school year and you say we're going to test in March, they don't have 180 days. They've got maybe 125 days, minus all of the special events that are in a school schedule, and you cut that down and teachers are dealing with 90 days of instruction. I mean, we do the math and it creates a dilemma. And what it does is it puts pressure on the system, and the pressure then creates an attitude of, I can't take anymore, I can't do anymore. And so it creates this other dichotomy. What we've done from our state is said, okay, we have to attack this conversation from an equity lens. We've got to advocate for equitable outcomes. How do we do that for teachers where we're not a professional developer praying and spraying that what we say works, trying to break through mindsets? Because school educators come to us in one of four quadrants, and most often they are challenged with either a willingness or an ability. And when those two come together, and unwilling and unable to do the work, that's a really tough place to be. So we've invested our energies in collaboration and coaching amongst teachers with themselves. We have put time and energy into, so for example, you spending time with your teachers, talking about what it is that we want students to learn, how are we going to know they learned it, what are we going to do for those that don't learn, what are we going to do for those who accelerate. That coaching and putting teachers with experts, people who have done the work, other teachers from around the country who have done the work, has produced for them the opportunity to take a breath in the profession, apply the knowledge that they know, take new knowledge that they're learning, and give kids a chance with something different and something new. Outside of that, the system is so pressure cooking them on a hamster wheel that they don't have the luxury of trying anything new for fear of failure. If they waste a week of instruction of trying something new and they don't get the outcomes they want, their scope and sequence is set back, and the standards that kids have to acquire to be able to demonstrate their proficiency on a test, they're behind. And so I think it creates a number of challenges around this conversation that we're trying to bridge in a collaborative nature through coaching and support. And I had an opportunity in Arkansas when I was with West Ed. I heard the state of Arkansas, states have their own personalities. And we sat in this group, and Arkansas would raise their hand and say, we're doing something wonderful for teachers. And the Colorados and the Arizonas and the Massachusetts of the world and the Mississippis would say, yeah, we get it. But you only have 500 LEAs in your state. California, we've got, 2,000 LEAs in our state, and our districts go from 650,000 students to 10. So, for us, it's like, what are we going to learn from you? But I'll remember I sat with a teacher and asked him, what are you guys doing there? And she said to me, we are holding our system accountable for equitable outcomes for all students in our school. I said, wow, that's interesting. Never heard anybody say that before. So who's leading that? And she said, well, we are. And I said, no, I mean, her name was Darla Sampley. She's a 4th, 5th grade teacher in Arkansas at Fort Smith Elementary School. And I said, no, what is your principal leading this discussion? How are you guys doing this? She says, no, we as teachers are doing this work. We are holding each other accountable. I asked her, how did you get there? How does a teacher group decide we are holding each other accountable? And she said, through coaching and collaboration around these 4 questions. And that's for me in California, when we realized, okay, we can't stand in front of teachers anymore and preach about equity. We have to get into the work and give them the supports they need so they can do the work of equity, producing equitable outcomes for kids by answering the questions and giving them the right support. So we've ventured into that quite a bit. That's a long answer for your question, but I hope it covers the gamut.
Ken, before you go further, I think it's really funny. You talked earlier. One of the things that struck me was, what am I going to learn in a district that's this big, right? Mm-hmm. Or having to serve districts this big, what am I going to learn from a little old state like yours? And you made an earlier comment that kind of shared the difficulties in special ed of getting over these judgments that we have for these students. And it's funny to me that we naturally always struggle with pre-labeling, pre-identifying what is the scenario, who's going to be helpful. And the one thing, we've recorded a ridiculous number of episodes. We've been really fortunate to have incredible guests. And what's fantastic is, we can boil common themes down into 3 or 4 that just have local flair, specific, whether we're talking Alaska all the way across, into different countries. In Africa, we've had the opportunity to talk to these educators that have so many features that are so similar, dealing with the same challenges, but our biases and our predetermined expectations often are a limiting factor. And so when you think about your population, Matt, right, that you are advocating for, that is the hardest thing that you're up against. It's nothing that the kids can overcome when we are closed off as educators. And going back to my previous word of being an advocate, but also having these biases before we start this conversation. It's just, it's one of those things that for me, the dots are connecting of saying like, yeah, we are as influential in these kids based off how we teach them compared to how we think about teaching them and how we collaborate with others to make environments for that teaching to be successful. So I just wanted to kind of point that out, that it may just be me, but those connections are powerful.
You hit it, Matt. I've never seen a system transform, and I've done it for over 3 decades. And I've lived in a system that was completely unable and unwilling to conform or improve. So we could run circles around any state plan and produce any plan anybody wanted, and we could pass any federal program monitoring, nothing would change. I've never seen a system do it without teachers in deep collaboration and problem solving around student learning. And if they don't facilitate the environment where they create time and space for teachers to even have that minimum hour a week, not prep time. There's prep time that needs to exist for teachers to prepare for their work, time to collaborate with my colleagues and just say, hey, what did you do? How did you teach that? What percentage of students did you get to pass that CFA, the common formative? I've never seen a system transform without that. And the systems that are transforming in California are all investing in that. It's not rocket science, but our policymakers and our state leaders, me included, right? We get distracted with the next shiny object. So we put a lot of money into things, and teachers are like, okay, that's great. I'm glad you're doing that. But how are you helping me become a better teacher? And that's where it gets really challenging.
Well, the way you just framed that has me excited for something so I'm now an instructional coach, serving our secondary schools in my district. And I've been working on a project for the last couple of weeks that's going to roll out right after the new year. We're recording this before the holiday break. And the goal is to really focus on creating collaboration amongst all of our middle school math teachers, particularly 6th grade, but it's going to permeate to 7th and 8th as well. So I'm going to teach one period a day in one of the 6, we have 3 middle schools, in one of the teachers' classrooms, in one of the middle schools for 10 days straight. And every day that teacher gets to observe me teach. The other 6th grade math teacher in the building gets to come and observe me almost every day. And then the other 6th grade math teachers from the other buildings, 3 of those days are going to come observe and then spend the last 2 periods of the day having reflective conversation together. I'm going to repeat the model in the next middle school and in the next middle school. So it's actually going to be a total of 6 weeks. So every teacher will have that 2-week period where they see it every day, but also 9 times total over that span as an entire grade level team. They're going to come together, reflect, and really it came from the idea of there are things that I've been working with these teachers on in in-service days, and they're one-offs, right? And it's me modeling in a vacuum, and there's been some momentum built from that, but it's hard for teachers to see the sustainability of some of these ideas and, just like you said, the time to collaborate. My goal is for them to say, I love this, what you did, that doesn't seem to make any sense, or it really didn't connect with students, or it may be working in this school, but I'm not sure it's going to work in my school with my population of students. Just getting that collaborative conversation around seeing common teaching. We're going to model some co-teaching as well, working with one of the other coaches. So I'm really excited about this experience because I think there's a little bit of hesitancy with the teachers and feeling, a little bit uncomfortable with what's going on, but I've been doing it for 4 years now. So there's a lot of trust between me and the teachers. But again, like you said, it's that authentic collaboration, not during their prep time, to think, evaluate, and reflect on teaching that we so commonly don't have the opportunity to participate in.
One of the things,
go ahead,
sorry,
Matt.
I would love to just ask this. One of the things that Matt, you're kind of saying is the idea of the teachers and having the opportunity as well as the openness. One of the other uphill battles is certain things like due process in special education and with a population and accountability, that whenever you bring up certain things like an IEP that is a legally binding document for educational progress, that always makes everyone sit up a little bit higher and, close fit a little bit tighter in those moments. How do you usually recommend merging your desire for teachers to think openly, but also work within the means of an IEP and avoid a population specifically that can lead to due process fairly quickly if things fall apart?
Yeah, that's a really interesting and great question, Matt. And Ken, I think your idea is tremendous, right? I think the fact that you're creating space, which is what teachers really, when you cut through all the minutia and you get down to brass tacks, I was a better teacher when I had time with my colleagues. When I had time with my colleagues to just reflect on my own teaching or reflect on the teaching, or just say, hey, I have a test. What strategies are you using? So the fact that you're creating that space, I mean, I'd love to hear more down the road, like how is that working? Because any model that has potential, in California, we're always interested in replicating anything we can around the various populations we have. So I think that's a tremendous thing. And Matt, I think, with the due process, I was a director of special education for some time. I really struggled to figure out how to mitigate some of the due process, but I ended up having a discussion with a with a parent of a child. She had 2 children with autism, and she was always filing due processes against the team. And the team was losing the will and resources to continue to fight, because no matter what they did, they felt like they could do no right. And they would leave these IEP meetings thinking they landed on the right outcomes, and then they would find themselves being served with a state complaint or request. And it was disheartening, because educators, they put their heart into the work, and when you find yourself in the legal side of special ed, it's not pleasant. So I had a conversation with her, and I began to understand what the issues were. I tried to hire her. So I asked her, would you come and work for us? Obviously we're not doing things the way you think they should be done. There's things that you think we should improve. I want to get better. I want my teams to get better. Would you as a parent work for us part-time? Help our teams understand what is the disconnect between what we're doing as a team in preparation and the IEP and what you want, because obviously we're not hitting it for you. You know what her answer was? She could not, because she saw us as the enemy to getting what she needed for her kids, because her biggest fear wasn't any of the fears that we had. Her biggest fear was, if she passes away, who is going to have the will to take care of her 2 kids? And I had completely forgotten that side of the equation for her. Like, my fight is not personal with you. My fight is everything I need for these kids, because if I die, my grandparents can't deal with 2 kids with autism. It had already destroyed her marriage. My mom and dad can't care for them. You're not going to care for them. So who's going to take care of them? Because no friend's going to step in for 2 kids with autism that have intense needs. And I had not thought about that. And once she said that, I said, you know what, you're right. You need to get everything you can from a system, because those kids, if we miss an opportunity to educate them, if your worst scenario, she was scared to travel. She wouldn't go on vacation. She was scared to drive for fear of getting in an accident. She got in an accident and got hurt. Number one, she couldn't work, but there was nowhere for those kids to go. It would put so much pressure on her elderly mom and dad to care for them, because they were intensive. And that softened me at that point. I was like, you know what? I get it. And what I realized that educators were struggling with especially when it came to special education. But what I found across the gamut was there were two ways that parent teachers worked with each other, and there were two ways they worked with parents. They either worked and established a personal relationship or a professional relationship. And for special education, it made sense because, Matt, when I tried to place my kids in general education classrooms, I didn't go to teachers who wanted to fight me. I went to the teachers I had a personal relationship with, who would do the things that I needed them to do. And so consequently, if that was you, Matt, I would put most of my kids in your class because you and I had a personal relationship. You were going to go the extra mile. I could work with you. I could get some things done. I didn't go to the teacher who I had a professional relationship with because they weren't going to flex and budge. I was going to be in an argument with them all the time about what kids needed. What I found was our teachers moved at the speed of their professional or their personal relationships with parents. They really wanted to establish those. And the professional side of the work was throwing them off. When a parent came in with I'm a professional parent trying to get everything I can for my kid. You're a professional educator. I'm this is how I'm working. We don't have a personal relationship. I never will with you. This is how we do business. That was hard. So once we shifted, like understanding why we had to be in a professional at times, and yes, it was appropriate to try and establish personal, the due process, whether it went away or not, wasn't the point. It was, do we understand what is happening here? And when educators understood, yeah, I get it. Mom's afraid of passing away. She's got to get everything she can for these two kids because no one else is going to take them. They're going to fall into the state ward. The teacher said, yeah, I understand what she's doing. And then we were good with the due process. Even though we didn't like it, we still tried to mitigate it. We still tried to solve it. But the due process didn't hurt as much, and we weren't as focused on it.
I think it's so important for us as much as possible to always take into account the parent perspective. And, you don't have to be a parent to have that perspective. It's just, it's just leading from a point of empathy with your students and with your parents. Like I personally can't stand when I hear teachers make comments like, I can't believe they don't show up for open house, or I can't believe they don't show up for conferences, or I have to track them down. I mean, maybe they're working 3 jobs. Maybe they logistically can't attend these things because of their employment or because of taking care of other children or taking care of an elderly parent or taking care of something that we're not aware of. And our students are immersed in those environments so often. And I find as though it's very easy for teachers to have empathy towards students that might be coming from challenging homes and challenging backgrounds.
Yes.
It's part of the position, but I find it interesting that a lot of times that empathy is harder to develop for the parents. And I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because we're not interacting with them, maybe because we view them as adults, but in general, it's just important to approach everything with empathy, to try to be on the same page as much as possible, and to not take things so personally, like you're saying, and just be there to provide the best service for students that we possibly can on a daily basis. So
absolutely can. We started asking the question.
Pardon?
We started asking the question, what's your biggest fear? You and I have empathy for each other because I understand that you have 4 young ones. I have 3. But I never worried where my kids would go if I passed away because they're totally capable. Their godfathers would take them. My mother would be fine with them. They're completely capable, and they would be, but until I ask that question and you understand, like for your point, the empathy for a parent with a child with a disability, almost every time we asked them, what's your biggest fear? It was that they would pass and no one would take care of their kids because they wouldn't know how, they wouldn't have the resources, they wouldn't be capable, they'd go into foster or they'd go avoid it. So I think your point is so important, Ken, because it's not just the empathy that you and I have for one another as being a parent of a child who doesn't have a disability, but trying to understand the mindset of a parent of a child with a disability, particularly if it's mild or severe. Yeah. So I appreciate you saying that.
That's a really important question to ask. So I'm curious a little bit more about your position that you currently have with the CCE that you that you're working in now. Can you explain a little bit more about the California Collaborative
Sure.
for Education Excellence
Sure.
and what you do there and what it's
Yeah,
about?
yeah. It's complicated, so I'll paint a picture. In the state of California, you imagine a triangle. At the top of that triangle, you have the State Board of Education. On the other side, you have the Department of Ed. And on the other side of the triangle, you have our organization, the CCE. In the middle of that triangle is the governor and the Department of Finance. And so we are the triad of us, our three entities are trying to curate and help improve educational outcomes in the state. We have a particular charge of helping districts, schools, and county offices accomplish their local control accountability plan goals. The local control accountability plan came out of Governor Brown at the time and State Board President Michael Kirst out of Stanford. And they developed a new funding formula for the state. And then as a result of that funding formula, every district gets an LCAP is what they call it. Our responsibility is to help improve those outcomes. So work comes to us in two ways. It comes to us statutorily. So the legislature, the Assembly and the Senate for the state of California will pass an outcome for us or ed code, and it will create an initiative for us. So we have community engagement initiative where we work with districts to help empower parents to give feedback into the system so that they can help inform their plans. We also have statute. Statute is designed by, help schools improve, and we can create the work that through our empathy interviews that we do every year that say is what do the practitioners in the field need? And then we create. So one of the things that we grappled with in the state of California, for example, they run the gamut, 650 students in LA Unified at their highest time to, a district that has 3. We have a lot of small rural communities and rural school districts. The leaders of those school sites and the leaders of those districts are often isolated and don't have the access to a myriad of supports like you would in an urban. In a rural, they don't have them. And so we created a small school district leadership institute where leaders in these small schools get coaches who will help them navigate, how do you manage a budget? Because they're doing it all. How do you write an LCAP? How do you deal with all these? So that's an example of a statute and then an example of legislative. And so it comes to us that way. I have a staff of 35 that work across the state of California. They are hybrid. They are hybrid because we want them to be in schools. We want them to be in districts. We want them to be working with county offices. So county offices are how we divide the state. Some in New York, you have BOCES, and other places you have regions, but in California, it's counties, and there are 58 of those counties. So we have 10,000 schools, 2,000 LEAs that include charters, and our charge is to try and help that system improve, which is, at times it's really rewarding and really challenging. And given the state budget or the budgets for a lot of states, our budget in particular is going to be a challenge, and we have to get creative about how we do that.
So you're primarily working with upper level administrators in those districts and organizations to help them improve the systems and operations of their school district to then trickle down and impact what's happening in the classrooms.
That's right. And we've got a couple of projects where we're elbow to elbow with teachers. Those are the best projects, where we're working with teachers to help build models of collaboration and coaching so that once they have a model of how a district does the work, then the district can matriculate up, okay, this school did this. And so now we can build our model around how this school did this. And so our intensive assistance model is an example of that. We go in and we have experts that come in and we support the teachers. We work with the districts. We work with the teams. And what happens is we try to help the district leadership remove barriers that would distract teaching and learning from the collaborative model. So in one school we went into, we would sit down and try to prioritize the collaboration for teachers, and teachers were saying, and we're really having a real hard time, even with the time collaborating. Well, what we ended up finding out was that the district had so many coaches into the school. They had 19 different coaches hitting these new teachers at any one time. And it's all well intended, all money that's designed to help them improve. Not saying it's the wrong way to do it. The idea was that they were all in the school, and the teachers are just taking direction from 19 different. You couldn't do it. So without the intensive assistance model, the teachers would have never been able to lift that up. And then we put in money and we help those districts think about what they can do differently.
Sometimes I wonder, and Ken, I don't know if you ever have these feelings, but we often have access to classroom teachers, coaches, admin, school superintendents, usually like the pinnacle if it's not a, say, keynote speaker on the podcast. For you in your current role, what would you say is a massive win that you remember? Like for me, when I see light bulbs go off in my kids from something I taught them, I know I won that day. What are some examples of things that you felt like you left knowing that you changed the lives of kids or changed the lives of students in your current role? Because I'm assuming that you have a tremendous opportunity. There's probably plenty of pressure with that, but just if you want to gloat, feel free to gloat. But what does something in what I would consider a very influential position, what does a win look like? And how does that trickle down to the most important stakeholders, which are the kids?
Sure. So, we measure our success based on the California dashboard and how districts do in relationship to student performance. That's not my win. Matt, to your point, it's bigger than that. For me, as an executive director, when a district or a county or a school says we couldn't have done it, whatever it is, without the CCEE, that is the translation to the win. That's the thing that tells me we exist for a purpose and we're meeting that purpose. Like we couldn't have done that without you. That's where I feel like for me, I get a sense of appreciation. Okay. Because we have over 50 different initiatives that we're curating across the state. And if anyone was to go to our website, they would see that at the cce-ca.org, that there are a myriad of resources in that website that we are creating for the people to use, teachers to use, local leaders to use. When I hear those systems come back and say, hey, that tool that you created, that universal support tool that helps districts think about how to merge their general education and special education systems to promote more inclusive opportunities for students with disabilities, that tool we couldn't have done it without that tool. For me, that's where I'm like, okay, the money that we're being given by the state and the really important responsibility the governor has given us, that's when I know we're making a difference.
That makes a lot of sense, and that's it's good to see, because through conversations of this podcast, through my work as moving into an instructional coach, you see how there are so many important pieces to make a school district run successfully. And for a student to be successful in a classroom, first and foremost, you need a great teacher, right? That is the most important piece of that. But for a good teacher to be great, for a great teacher to be greater, there has to be systems in place from the building administrator, from the curriculum office, from coaches if they have it at the district, the superintendent, and then all of the things that happen outside, above, around the superintendent. All of those pieces have to be put in place for teachers to be as successful as possible. Good teachers could still be great teachers, but they still might not be hitting their potential without all of these pieces working together to make everything as efficient and as student aligned as possible. So it's really interesting to hear your perspective. I really appreciate that. So
Thanks, Ken.
I would like to transition into our exit ticket, which is the same 4 questions we ask every guest every week. Question number 1, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
Okay. You're giving them all to me or just the one?
We'll do one at a time.
One at a time.
Okay. Okay.
Actually, let's see if you can memorize all four. Let's have
I was on another podcast and I had a really similar question to that. And I had said to them that the best thing a teacher could do is create an environment where a kid feels like they belong. And I missed that as a young teacher. I was so focused on my professional goals and what I needed to get through and what I needed to accomplish and what I needed to teach and what I was accountable for, that I forgot that my number one thing that I could do to make those kids successful was to create an environment where they felt like they belonged and they felt like they were cared for. And sometimes in the busyness of that, even at home as a dad, in the busyness of that for my young kids, I sometimes forgot to stop and just smell the roses with them. Mm-hmm. And for me, when I talk to teachers, I tell them, before you even get to the other hard stuff, create an environment where kids like to be there, where they feel like you care for them and they belong here. And you would be amazed, Ken, how many classrooms we come across in our state. And when I was with West Ed, where that's not the first mode of operation, particularly in the secondary schools. That's much harder for them to remember because, I taught chemistry. Chemistry is what I'm teaching. You're here and I have 240 of you coming in throughout the day, 6 periods a day. But even at that level, they needed it.
I really appreciate the word belong, because that's different than having good relationships with students. The feeling of or being comfortable. The feeling of belonging is a much different way of putting it. And I agree at the secondary level, it's different because they're cycling in. You only have them for a short period of time, and students are moving from class to class. I recently had the opportunity to hear Ron Clark speak, and he would have his teachers travel the country at times, and he said they would follow students throughout the day, and they would observe students who never spoke the entire day, never spoke to a peer, never spoke to a teacher. And that's not to criticize the teachers at all, but it's to put into perspective that if you are not intentionally taking a moment to recognize every student in your class, they might go the whole day without feeling recognized or truly not being recognized in any capacity. And that feeling of belonging is so important to establish. And it's something that I tried to focus on early in my career, but I would say the mistake I made was I really tried to focus on creating a sense of belonging where they felt they belonged with me, and like they were a part of my tribe and I had their back, but not the feeling of belonging amongst each other. And when I realized how important that was a whole nother level of that feeling of belonging in a classroom.
That's well put, Ken. That's exactly what it is.
So the next one I'm excited about, because you may have stumbled into a pretty good thing when you talked to your principal and said, I'm just going to take on 6 kids. But what is the best piece of advice that you received? And interestingly, you can consider it coming from a colleague, a supervisor, or even a student.
So I've spent I spent, because of the emphasis on students with disabilities, my over 3 decades, I think I've spent 27 years in the service of some kind of administrative level, where I took on some role in conjunction with teaching, and then ultimately left about 5 years into my profession and never walked into a classroom with 30 kids. So most of my time, I would say, was in the first 5 years of getting opportunities to teach. And then all of a sudden I found myself in service of those who were teaching. Mm-hmm. And I heard an administrator one time tell me something that I really have kept as a good advice for any educator. But the minute you think you're somebody, you're nobody. And I often found that people were in roles of leadership, principals, coordinators, directors, whatever it may be, and that they found that because that title meant that they knew more, that they had achieved some level of professional expertise, that they had more to share than they had to learn. And that's what he was trying to teach me in the short opportunities that we had. And I've used that. You know, best advice I can give people is if you're leading, you are in service of, which means you need to come with an attitude of you have more to learn than you have to share.
Mm-hmm.
And when you come to a position with that, what I found is educators, particularly teachers, are interested in sharing with you what they know, which empowers you to fix a system that allows them to do more of what they need to be able to do, and to do it with more efficiency and effectiveness. So the minute you think you're somebody is the minute you're nobody. And I learned that as a superintendent too. Superintendents, my colleagues sometimes would walk around and you know, they felt like they knew a lot, and it was and they sometimes stumbled because they weren't open to the idea that they didn't know a lot. They had more to learn.
I love that.
I hope that answers your question, Matt.
Yeah, no,
It does. That's a great answer.
Yeah, I very much enjoy that, which leads to almost the second end of this, or maybe more short-term point of view. You know, speaking to educators right now, we're recording this right now, right before the holiday season. It is holiday week. And needless to say, we understand that the school year goes in waves. And there are days, possibly weeks, that we are struggling to survive. What is a message you can continue to pass on to help every educator who's listening power up through those moments of struggle?
Yeah. I've been there. I go through it myself. The ebb and flow. March Madness is real for teachers. You know, I don't know that I have a universal approach that I could offer that someone would say, "Oh, that's a great message." But I think for me, the one thing that has helped me get through some of those ebb and flows where the system is just so fast and furious is always keep perspective and always be reflective. Sometimes what I found myself doing as an educator, I found myself always critical, more critical about how I taught, more critical about what was working and what wasn't working. I was so hard on myself. And I find that young teachers in particular are very hard on themselves. Like they've got to get this profession right away. And when you talk to a 30-year veteran, the ones that have lasted for a long time, they always do a nice job of keeping perspective. Like that's not the whole point. Is you're not supposed to be perfect. You're supposed to fail forward. You're supposed to try new things. You're supposed to, kids are gonna own you sometimes. That's the way it is. But reflect. Why are you here? Why do I do this work? I do it because I love kids. So you didn't turn that in on time. You didn't get that right. That didn't work. That strategy. Today was a lousy day. I find that the young teachers are more focused on perfection, and the veteran teachers are more focused on perspective. And the sooner that people can have that, it allows them to kind of settle in. Okay, there were some parts of the year that were really good, and there were some parts of the year that were really tough. I'm still in the business of doing the right work for kids. And I know I don't have to be perfect as an educator. And perfection is our enemy for educators right now. And it's what's driving people out of the profession sometimes.
I think that long range perspective is so important in so many facets. I would often say to parents, after we would have conferences after the first marking period. Early in my career, I was trying to start helping the kids and, for lack of a better term, fixing the kids right out of the gate. And I would commonly say that I kind of just let the chips fall the first marking period. Who are they? How do they learn? How do they interact? How do they work? Are they responsible? Like, are they typically turning things in on time? Just kind of let the chips fall, because I have 180 days to help your child grow. And the first quarter is just about figuring out how this is all going to work out. And then I still have 3 quarters of the year left to really help them grow in a very personalized capacity. And we can take that same perspective as teachers.
Right.
You know, if you are going to be in this game for 30 years, which is a possibility, right? That if you're going for your full pension, you're looking at 30 years, right? So, you know, have the perspective of, like you said, Matt, I'm going to grow, I'm going to reflect, and I'm going to improve for 30 years. And my mentality was always, I am going to be a better teacher for the younger brother or younger sister of every student I've ever had. And I would typically tell the students that would come back to visit me that had younger siblings, and they would say, you know, oh, you know, my sister was telling me about this and that. Why didn't you do that with me? I was sorry. I'm a better teacher now than I was for you. Like, they're getting a better version of me than you did, because I'm farther in my career. And if I had shifted from 5th grade to 2nd grade, well, I'm stepping down a couple notches, right? I'm not going to be as good a teacher my first year in 2nd grade as I was my 8th year in 5th grade. Or if I'm a secondary teacher and I'm switching from calculus to algebra, I'm not going to be as good as I was, but I have that time to reflect and grow. So
yeah, that's great.
Last question before, well, Matt really has the last question, but that's an easy one. It's easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom. What separates teachers who are constantly the ones seeking to change, innovate, and adopt new teaching strategies?
What separates those who are constantly early adopters?
Not even early adopters, just the willingness to change, reflect, innovate. You know, innovate doesn't have to mean technology, but just the ones that are constantly willing to adapt and change.
You know, I think, you know, you could go with the things you're typically going to hear, Ken. It's mindset. It's not having a fear of failure. It's, you know, there's a myriad of things that you probably could hear that are going to be running the normal track of the gamut in terms of response. I'm going to take a different approach. It's joy. When you get joy from the profession, you are more likely to try and do new things. When you get joy in the profession, you're more likely to be a forward thinker. You're more likely to take risks. You're more likely to collaborate in different ways. You're more likely to have energy. And I think for educators, what I see sometimes is they lost the joy of why they came into the profession and what energized them to get up at 5 o'clock every morning to get to school on time. They've lost that, and they mix it up with happiness. And being happy comes from so many other external things. My boss treating me with respect. Do I have the resources to do what I need to do? And financially, am I well off, or do I have enough money to all those things equally important? But that happiness changes based on circumstances that are external, and that often is driving. What I see from educators who are like on the cutting edge of things, they have joy in the profession, even though they may not be happy, right. Even though things may not be perfect, even though they may be pissed off, they have joy in being with kids. And when they have joy with being with kids, I find that they're more likely to collaborate, they're more likely to try ideas, and they're more likely to say, yeah, let's try that. Let's do that. And the teachers that have lost their joy around the profession, you find them as fundamental resistors or late adopters. They have gone to the element of this too shall pass. I'm not going to do anything new because this idea is going to fly through, and I'm not going to put effort towards it. The ones that have joy are like, yeah, let's give it a shot. Anything for my kids, whatever it takes. And that's, in my mind, the simple difference.
Mm-hmm.
It is a noticeable difference. I think there is a lot of that in younger teachers, and there is also the nature of how do you continue that joy. It is
Mm-hmm.
partially personality. It is also partly care from admin and feeling
Yes.
supported and what have you. But it all rolls into, like you said, it doesn't have to be sunshines and rainbows to find joy.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be consistent good days to have joy. But when it's bad days, feeling supported does go a long way.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So
mean, hey, listen, I'm working at the state level. There's a lot to be unhappy about. I gotta have the reason why I am joyful every morning to wake up and do the work that I do. And that keeps me trying.
Totally. Speaking of the work that you're doing, we have been really fortunate to take some time to learn with you and from you. And just want to give an opportunity, if there's a way that we can continue to follow your effects in education, whether that's through social media or any website or any other media that you produce that continues to benefit educators across this country and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. The biggest thing that I think we have going for us right now where people can stay connected is our podcast. It's called Rising from the Margins. It's highlighting schools in California that are doing really interesting work. We just did one on Washington Elementary School in Madera. We're doing one on Inglewood Unified School District. For those that don't know the story, Inglewood used to be a blue ribbon school. They are now in state receivership. It's a fascinating story of what has happened to a district and ultimately what they're doing to get out of it. And the individual that is leading that district, those teachers in that district, they cannot get a raise like everybody else. They're in state receivership. So everybody that's there has joy in serving the kids that they serve, in spite of the fact that they can't get a negotiated salary increase. They have incredible limitations on what they can do. They're joyful in the work and it comes out. Those kinds of things come out. And so that's a great way to stay connected to what's happening with our work. Also our website.
Very interesting. I'm definitely going to check that out. So we'll link up to your website, your podcast, and any of your social media handles. You can just, wherever you're watching or listening, just scroll to the bottom and find all that there, as well as on our website at powereduup.com. So Matt, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. Matt and I typically, most of our guests are just still in the classroom teachers, but we've had the opportunities to speak with individuals like you that have kind of run the gamut in education and land themselves in these different positions. And I think it's really refreshing for teachers to hear, as well as just for Matt and I to hear about individuals that are involved in organizations that seem so disconnected from the classroom, to see what they're doing to make the classrooms as best as possible. And it really makes you feel more connected to all of the organizations involved in education. So thank you for everything that you're doing to serve the students in California. And again, thank you for your time.
Hey, thanks, Ken. Thanks, Matt. I really enjoyed time with you. This was awesome. Appreciate it.
So as we power down this episode, Matt, you have left us feeling powered up. Thank you so much for your time. And for our audience, we look forward to another great conversation next week. We'll talk to you then.